All right, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekly Strength Club Q&A and fun posting this time, not the usual shit posting. I'm here with my boy Chase Lindley. Chase, how's it going, man?
Doing well. How are you, Alex?
I am doing okay. I'm doing very okay. What's been going on with me recently? I'm sick of eating protein, I think. I'm like my level of taste for eating meat at this point, it's like completely gone. I can't stand any more chicken breast today, no matter how I cook it. I feel like I can
Mm.
eat 800 grams of carbs a day. No amount of protein I feel like I want to eat.
See, I've been kind of in that kick. Like I've been doing like a bunch of Monster Mash, and like it's good. It's easy. You can just like almost drink it, but man, I need to have some flavor in it sometimes. And I've been kind of doing a little bit to it to kind of add to it, but it's still just it's you're like a dog, man. You just eat the same thing. You kind of get excited for the sixth bag of kibble that doesn't change.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. I've been even no matter how decadent I attempt to make my damn smoothies, it's like, oh, I'm gonna put this fruit in it. It's gonna be
Hmm.
great. It's just like I can't even do protein shakes anymore. There's
Yeah.
just like I feel like I just want to eat like carbs and then just sleep and die. So that's been going amazing. But yeah, so we're having a bit of an off-topic episode. We're going to be doing a lot of YouTube e-celebrity drama, a lot of YouTube bullshit. But this episode, it's the Starting Strength Internet Defense Force. We're going to talk about common shit posting about starting strength. This is going to be more of a banter episode where we just kind of go through what within the starting strength universe tends to get poo-pooed a lot, and then rebuttals to that, and then talking about why those things are reasonable or are unreasonable. Um, Chase, before we get started, what do you think the most common thing is? If you had just to pin it down to give us the 2-minute version of this episode.
Everyone shits on starting strength because one, we're all fat. We don't know what the hell we're talking about, and that we have not been in the same, I guess, experience round with like bringing people to kind of weightlifting events that are pretty well known or
Okay.
top level powerlifting meets. We just don't really have, I guess, our foot in the door. I guess you could say.
Yeah, yes, relatively small, quote unquote, company in terms of
Hmm.
how many people work for it. I would say the biggest thing is yes, we're all fat and ugly. Some of us more than others. Chase is bringing the fat. I'm bringing the ugly. Together,
Hmm.
we cover both sexers. The Rip is fat and old. I think that's my favorite one. We'll address that a little bit later on because it's like the old one always cracks me up because it's like, what do you want him to do? You know,
Yeah, find the fountain of youth.
he can't get less old. I'm sorry. There's nothing that he can do about that. But yeah, so we'll begin. Yeah, so if you want to contact us, we have Chase Lindley at Chase Lindley on Instagram, his backup account at Chase_Lindley. Give us a follow. You can find me at acostrength.com. And if you want videos on the show, we do a lot of form checks and things like that. That's going to be support at strength.club. We will probably get to some form checks in the end of this one. This won't be too serious either. Chase, are available for online coaching, right?
Yes, I am. I currently only have about 7 people, but I work with basically anyone. If you're wanting to go into a meet prep for powerlifting, weightlifting, I have a few people doing that right now, or just general strength training. I got you.
Yeah, yeah. So Chase basically has to spin both plates. He's doing like some online coaching for the side, as well as like the full time coaching at SSOKC. So
Hmm.
he's a busy boy, very very busy boy. I primarily do like mostly online coaching, and then I'll do kind of trips and rounds to work with a lot of my athletes. So like for example, in October, I'm going back to Pittsburgh. I'm working with a lot of my judo guys there, so that'll be pretty fun. But yeah, so we'll get through the main topics for the day. We're going to start with the Zach Tillander videos, which have come out recently, which have been a cause of a severe amount of butt hurt on both sides. So we'll go through that. We'll talk about the people who think technique doesn't matter. We'll kind of do a best of Reddit, things that we typically see on there when people are poo-pooing starting strength. And then we'll cover the most topical one, starting strength's rampant or problem with rampant obesity. Um, yeah, so here we go. We'll start with this one and see how it's going. Oh, Jeff Riggins in the chat saying hi, pals. Hey Jeff, how's it going? We haven't had chat to work for a few times recently. It's been saying like it will on my screen like Zach is pretty respectable. Oh Jeff, we should have had you on the stream, man. We could have argued with you instead of Zach. But yeah, we've had a few times where to say like there's a high amount of people watching and then zero within like the same 2 seconds, and like no one's in the chat. Somebody's in the chat,
Hmm.
so that's pretty weird. But Chase, do you want to give us the quick rundown of what's been going on?
Yeah, from Starting Strength Radio has had several episodes where he's talking about Olympic weightlifting, right? And basically, what he's kind of saying is the U.S. Olympic team has been kind of shitting the bed we really haven't been placing high, and that's been the case for about 30 something years now. Now, this year it's been kind of different, right? We've actually had pretty good success with the women, and what's his name who placed fourth? Harrison, right?
Harrison, some guy. Carry on.
Yeah, something. But that's kind of starting to change around. And Mark's basis is that it's because we are kind of training them a little bit differently, and that everyone needs to be strong, right? And Zach is kind of doing the opposite, right? He's saying yes, strength does matter, but there's kind of some different elements that Rip kind of overlooks.
Yeah. So basically, Rip talked about Olympic weightlifting. Zach Tillander tagged everything with all the starting strength stuff and has been trying, I don't want to say piggybacking off of that, but making a good bit of videos saying about how
Mhm.
egregiously wrong Mark Ripito is. But first, we'll answer a legitimate question from our boy Nicholas Webb. How's it going, Nick? He said, what is the next step for someone who has read Starting Strength and uses the Starting Strength app for programming and tracking, or what would a novice started 6 months ago need to study to improve? I would definitely go and watch a few of our previous shows, particularly the ones about programming, analyzing the NLP, how to end an NLP, things like that. Those all have a lot of good information in them. If you've been doing the LP for 6 months, it's almost entirely done. It's very
Mhm.
likely you're an intermediate trainee who is attempting to do improper training at this point. There's a second book that Asgard has produced called Practical Programming for Strength Training. It's in its third edition. It's really great. I love it. A lot of very valuable information in there. I don't think there's a really super tight intermediate app that is very handholdy. The kind of do-it-yourself one that I think is really good is Strength Club. It's Mix app. It's earlier in the description too. If you just look up Strength Club, it's kind of the name of our whole show too. So
Mhm.
you'll find Strength Club in there as well. But I would get practical programming if you can. Reach out to a coach. But you basically just kind of have to start absorbing information about programming and then venture into the world of intermediate land. What do you think, Chase?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're gonna have to do, Nicholas. But the problem is, if you get practical programming, do not flip to the Texas
Mm,
method or to some other advanced novice or intermediate advanced programming and say you're instantly going to do that. Read the first few chapters about the processes, the variables that you have to change to help you get from point A to point B, and not just this huge ripping off the band-aid type program change.
yeah. Avoid templates. Avoid figure out conceptually the decisions you need to make for programming, and then
Mhm.
start to learn how to make those decisions. That's kind of the process that practical programming can foster in you, rather than just fuck it, I'm just going to buy a $50 template and then off to the races. If you're like super time poor and you have absolutely no free time, a template may be the right idea. But you can probably find a little bit more time or a coach if you have the resources to do that.
Mhm.
But yeah, reach out to Chase about that stuff, man. He'll be
Yep.
more happy to help you out. This also reminds me. I think I have to show you that painting now. By the way, I got a painting this past weekend. Chase, can you see this without glare on it?
Oh, is that a T-Rex deadlifting?
It's a T Rex with a barbell in its hands. It's gonna go. So before I had a little Halloween decoration up there that said
Yeah.
"boo," but a lot of people who I had in video calls thought it said "boob" on it, which was inappropriate for my work. So I got this now, the T Rex deadlifting. It's going to go hang up
Nice.
in that spot after this. I wanted to show you with
Nice.
the close up. But yeah, plug to that girl whose name I forget, who I bought that little painting from. Um, but okay, yeah, back to the point. So things that we're talking about. The Zach Tillander videos. I would say the TLDW on that is that Zach thinks that it is a highly technical sport of which technique matters almost the most, more than absolute strength. Here we go. Jeff said another. Max Ada is also a solid that goes against Rip's teaching, and he's done well in PL and weightlifting. Yeah, Max Ada is with the Juggernaut Strength crew. They've definitely produced a lot of good lifters. I think that Max Ada. I remember it was. I think they had disagreements with it about the Olympic weightlifting radio episode that came out quite some time ago. That was a more complex disagreement. It would have been better if we did that one, but it didn't get as much traction, and this one just came up now. So we'll talk more about that later, Jeff, if you're super interested in it. But yeah, so some of the primary points in kind of Rip's little clip is that Lash's technique doesn't matter; it's kind of whatever. And I think the pragmatic take to say with that is after a certain level in Olympic weightlifting, everyone has excellent technique for them. They've been
Mhm.
practicing that technique for multiple decades at that point. It's not like any of these people have been walking off the street and it's their third year of doing CrossFit and they're the Olympic weightlifting Olympics. Like everyone's technique after a certain point is proficient enough to get them to that point. One way that I've always liked to think about this, and I'll see this a lot with sports that I'm involved in, is that there's kind of like a technique floor, or there's like a technique or skill proficiency funnel, right? So basically, it's just like as you are figuring out who is going to get to the next levels of competition, technique begins to matter more and more up to a certain point. So if it's like we have the shape of a funnel, basically it's like a V at the top of the funnel. Anyone can compete in anything. Like you can go and compete in mixed martial arts if you've never done mixed martial arts, you'll just die. It's totally fine, right? It doesn't actually matter how good your technique is. But let's say if you've been doing it for a year, technique is still pretty important, and then it gets more important and more important and more important up to a certain point. So like once you've been doing something for let's say a decade or for 15 years, or you're already a master of that sport, at that point, it comes down to a lot of the physical characteristics, right? So the funnel gets more and more narrow over time. Technique becomes, more and more and more important, and then the people who are the most technical to that point, and then after a certain point, the funnel straightens out and becomes that tube. And at that point, it's who is the most technically proficient who kind of makes it through. Or not the most technically proficient, but the most physically proficient, right? So it's
Yeah.
just like if you've been doing mixed martial arts for 20 years, the person who is stronger and faster and more coordinated will do better, even if you all know the same techniques.
Mhm.
Chase, any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, and kind of another way of thinking this is that what do most athletes at the really at high levels, right? What is kind of like their problem that they run into, and that's steroid allegations or drug testing, right? No one's really getting pot for you have a skill coach, right? Because
Yeah,
everyone's skill looks the exact same or their technique, but everyone needs to get that one edge, and usually that edge is I got to get stronger, right? Barry Bonds, Mark McGuire, everyone in that baseball category a swing. They've everyone at that level has almost the exact same swing, right? Maybe the difference is they're right or left-handed, but their technique is exactly the same. It's just now who the hell is stronger and hit the ball farther.
yeah. So like rules of large numbers, even if it's incredibly rare to find someone who can have perfect technique with a large enough country, you will find those people who have perfect technique, right? So it's
Mhm.
like the people who have both the personality and predisposition to be involved in the activity with our rules of large numbers most likely are. It's not to say that you couldn't have better genetic specimens in certain areas, but like they're good enough for the purpose of the example. Is that all of these people have technique that is like so proficient that it's gotten them to that level, right? So if like, could I say that Lasha's snatching technique is better than like Lou? I don't think that's appropriate to say. They're wildly different lifters. Their technique is going to
Mhm.
be a little bit different. I don't think it's necessarily a technique thing at that point, because that's kind of an individual quest that all of those people have been on. But after a certain level, all of them are at the highest level of the game. So I can't really say that technique is the most important thing in the world that's gotten them there. What starts to differentiate them is their ability to produce force. And
Yep.
that's the next point. He got really confused, I think, or maybe just didn't really write it out about like our definitions of power, and then, getting a little tripped up on what is the capacity for force production versus the rate of force development. And then we can go to the next slide so that we can see a little bit more about rate of force development. That's a little bit of a less common one that people talk about, which is basically it's like the maximum force produced over the time it took to reach there, right? So if we find the point of which force production is its maximum, what is the time to reach that? Chase and I were talking about this before the show. One of the biggest, predictors for like how long a snatch takes or how long a clean takes, it's going to be how tall the lifter is, because that really heavily correlates to how far the bar needs to move. So time to reach seems to be a pretty fixed thing after a certain level. Like if you were to take a
Mhm.
70-year-old Aunt Meredith, her snatch is probably wildly slower than Lou's is, right? She may never complete one ever, even if it's just with her hands. Who knows? So like time to reach after a certain level, it gets groomed down pretty well. It's almost hyper consistent. But the thing that you can vary is the ability to produce that force. Chase, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the two variables of the distance, again, usually everyone in your weight class, like you don't have like a 6'8" dude who's in the 93 category, right? Like you may have it, but everyone usually is kind of the same built lifter, right? It's just who's the strongest one in that category.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just like Greg Nuckols has talked about this a lot before, where it's like weight classes are almost always height classes. It's really about like
Yeah.
as much muscle that you can fit into a certain frame,
Mhm.
So it's just like you're not going to see someone at 81 who is like 6'4". It's just not going to happen.
Yep.
It's about as much muscle packed into the relatively shortest frame that you can get in there. So it's one of those things where it's like we're not really going to change time very much, because time is mostly predicted by height And at that level, everyone is genetically super gifted, right? So they're
Yep.
all very explosive people. So we have time and distance. They're not really going to change terribly much. And then after that, then we have the remaining thing that we can play with, which is force, which is, how much can I actually drive into the ground? And a lot of that is going to be determined by our maximum ability to produce force, which is what we consider to be strength. What was the next point that you think Zach brought up that we should probably chip into?
Um, I think it comes and goes into the field of a lot of the coaches will spend time with maybe trying to, and Rip kind of pointed this out with how they try to affect T in that equation. Again, it's so fixated by just how the person is wired, genetically gifted, and just the number of motor unit recruitment that person can get. Um, I
We got
think,
another one here real quick. We'll interrupt. I think he's asked it twice. Does your novice state diminish over time if you've been training for a long time, but not eating enough? Did the lifter develop sticking points while squat, bench, and dead, or below 225, and 400? Absolutely, man. Yeah, like sticking points or like stalls and programming can definitely be impacted by food. So he said he was. Let's see. He just posted it. 5'11" and 162. So you could definitely afford to get some more muscle on your frame. You would
mhm,
definitely be stronger if you had another 20 pounds of mass to move that around. But that's it takes an amount of time. So if in your current, period of lifting, you went from 140 to 160, that's great. Just keep that going. Continue to gain weight because that's almost entirely beneficial for these sorts of sports. But there's no specific point that has to be a novice or something like that. What do you think, Chase? If he's saying
yeah.
specific numbers.
No, there isn't. Everything kind of just goes along how it should be. Just depends on, again, how you're built, kind of. If you have, really long giraffe legs and short little stubby arms, your bench may be really heavy, but your deadlift may suffer, right? So where now your squat will be relatively heavier than your deadlift. It's just anthropometry is kind of going to affect that. And then, yeah, just how you recover. So like the eating goes into the recovery aspect. And if you're not doing everything to optimize your recovery, those numbers are going to be artificially low. Same thing with sleep too, or just the external stress that you're getting outside of the gym.
Yeah, man. So like if you're 5'11", 162 and you're like really not eating much protein, which is what I would probably guess, if you're eating like 60,
Hmm.
80 grams of protein a day, you're probably going to have a harder time in the gym than you need to. That's for damn for sure. I'm dealing with that problem right now. It's hard to get the amount of protein in. But yeah, so I guess we'll go through, we've already touched on the rate of force development thing, where he's functionally getting confused there. It's that rate of force development doesn't necessarily determine the winner. Someone on their third attempt could lift a relatively light load, and then move that thing super fast. Someone lifts 2.5 kilos heavier than that, moves it relatively slower. Man, they won the weightlifting competition. It is not a who moves the load the fastest static competition. It's not like a CrossFit WOD where it's how many times can you clean 225 within 60 seconds. It's not that whatsoever. Who has the most weight on the bar? That is, impacted by rate of force development, but rate of force development is second to force production capacity, which is what I think was one of the straw men that he presented
Hmm.
afterwards. Do you want to run us through some of these, Chase?
Yeah. The big thing is why at that top level, or even just the national level, why bother deadlifting so frequently, or even trying to get into the habit of building your deadlift higher than it should be. As here in starting strength, we understand that our ability to produce force is greatly improved on squatting heavy and deadlifting heavy, right? Now, this kind of goes into different programming schemes and stuff suitable to what your goal is, right? So maybe, if I was in an elite level position where I'm coaching a bunch of elite level guys, I'm already handling guys who are naturally strong and gifted. They may not have to deadlift as frequently because their ability to produce force is already naturally higher. But someone who's not as genetically gifted, I'm going to have to push them a little bit harder in strength to kind of make up for that deficit that they already have just because of they didn't have the right parents in that
Yeah,
state.
didn't have the right parents. Yeah, a large portion of like the criticisms here kind of come from like the demographics of who starting
Hmm.
strength talks to pretty frequently about saying like, oh, well, starting strength puts out this content and this content, where it's just like this is the demographic that they're primarily talking to versus the demographic that they're generally dealing with. Um, Yeah, it definitely confounds it by a good bit because you can kind of pick and pull sentences from both sides and be like, oh, these are incredibly stupid things to say. I can't believe they're saying this while missing all the
Yeah.
context. And like in one of the, I think the video was called "Addressing Incorrect Criticisms," was on the last Starting Shrink YouTube channel, and where they basically say it's like there was a 6 minute lead up to that little soundbite, and then they just took the soundbite and made fun of it. Like,
Yeah.
what the hell do you want? Like, you got to really contextualize these things. Um, Zach brings this up and saying that, let's say if you already have an Olympic weightlifter and they're pulling 600 pounds, how useful is it for them to get all the way to 700, right? And they're saying a lot of things about diminishing returns. However, I think that it misses the forest for the trees, I think, about saying that, like, that would imply that weightlifter's imperative is to get the deadlift from 6 to 700 more than increasing the clean and jerk or more than increasing the snatch. One thing with a lot of my power athletes is that I greatly expand the timelines for things. So I say, like, hey, over this next 6 months, if we can get 25 pounds onto your deadlift and we can keep the velocities the same and still keep you performing well at your practices, amazing, right? I know they're
Mhm.
still getting entirely stronger, but it's not like I'm saying we're going to get as fatigued as humanly possible to increase that deadlift as fast as we can. Like, Zach Tillander is totally right in that. Like, if the Olympic weightlifter completely stopped doing that work and decided to go from 6 to 700, tapered all of his volume down, completely changed who he is as a human being to get that next 100 pounds in his deadlift, yes, that would be a diminishing return if he ran like a 6 week, powerlifting taper and lost that 6 weeks of training time. That's right, right? But that's not really what we're saying. We're saying that if you can hit these things squarely within the concept of training, so like if someone's working in a quadrennial cycle as an Olympic weightlifter, we can say, hey, over this next 4 years, if we can take that deadlift from 600 to, let's say, 675 over 4 years, which is fairly reasonable, right? Um, if we can take that deadlift up 75 pounds and then not make that a taper or not make that a skill block or something like that, if you can just hit it squarely within your training and we can keep the velocities the same elsewhere, that's great. We just kind of know you're getting stronger across the board. Like the way that argument is presented, I think, is pretty faulty. And the same thing with
Yeah.
periodization, across the year. The next one, I think this was the most infuriating, but we'll stop into Jeff's comment first. What did he say? He said, I think technique has a role to play, to an extent on top of leverages. Some elite female lifters will out clean or snatch some of the men, but pull or less or squat less in maximums. What do you think, Chase?
So he said some elite female lifters will out clean or snatch some men. Um, I think these are again just two different weight classes. Those women that are a little bit heavier, they have more muscle mass. Um, they're able to pull, of course, some of the lighter men. Um, Again, this is a little bit different about how the women are neurologically kind of wired. Their squatting and deadlifting are a little bit more maximal level efforts to where they suck ass because of how they're wired about doing very maximal level attempts with a deadlift and a squat. Whereas submaximal, clean and a snatch, they are highly proficient at that.
Yeah.
More so than I think men.
And we got another one from John coming here, too. This is an interesting one. He said, top half of the bench is strong, but the bottom is weak. Advice. Chase, do you want this? Or do you want me to do it?
Um, I think maybe look at your where you are on the bench, how your positioning is. If your shoulders are sliding out, right, and your elbows are flaring out, of course your bottom's going to be weak. If your touch point is not where it needs to be, about where the sternum or the nipple line, that kind of that little zone, it's definitely going to cause a weak point. John, send in a video so we can kind of critique this a little bit more.
Yeah, find the email earlier on in the video. I think it's Mick or support@strength.club.
Mhm.
That's what it is. Yeah, support@strength.club. Send a video there. We'll be able to look at it for you. So I don't know how you know the top half of your bench is strong. I think what you're saying is that when you fail a bench, you just get stuck at the bottom. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That's the, like, if you're saying, oh, I fail my deadlifts on the floor, it's like, yes, if you were to put an extra 100 pounds on my deadlift, I would fail it on the floor. If I loaded my bench up to 500 pounds, I would fail on my chest. I would be able to get it down there and not get it back up. So that could be kind of a load selection thing that you're dealing with. Or if you've been doing partial, so if you've been doing like a pin press or a board press and you're like, oh, the top of my bench is great, then I would say build some more mass on your pecs. That's like number one. And then probably do some more pause press, like
Yep.
learn to get comfortable down in that position. All right, back to it. And then the next thing that came up in the video was Rip said, what do you think the difference is between an 80 kilo snatch and a 200 kilo snatch, right? It's not technique. And then to this, Zach Tillander was quite upset, and he was started to go and saying like, "Oh, the difference between 80 kilo snatch and 200 kilo snatch, those things are like athleticism and genetics, and then all of these kind of like meme buzzwords to get around the fact that saying the 200 kilo snatcher is stronger than the 80 kilo
Yeah.
snatcher. You know, like the technique is successful in so much that they get from point A to point B, and they satisfy the conditions of the meet itself, right? Like the technique is successful in that that lifter performed the movement and completed it. That's what we define as successful technique. But the two guy with 200 kilos is just straight up and down stronger. How do you feel about this one, Chase?
Yeah, or you can even take the same guy. Let's take like Klokov, for example. I don't know why he just popped into my head, but at some point, 80 kilograms was the most he could snatch. Now, his technique was probably pretty damn good at that point, right? Now, let's fast forward to 20 or to 200 kilograms on his snatch. It wasn't because he maybe modified a few things here and there that made him go from, you know, let's say his previous PR in the snatch was 197 to now 200. It was just because he's getting damn strong, right? He's done that movement pattern so many damn times to where it's ingrained into his head, and now he just needs to get that movement stronger.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's not as if you're squatting, or let's just take this with the bench press for example, with that John Gloria guy. It's not like John Gloria is benching 135 pounds, and then he just can't figure out where the bottom position is, and then
Yeah,
we tell him accurately where the bottom position is, and he's like, oh, dude,
$315.
I can bench 315 now. It's not how it works, right? Like there's if you are completing the lift successfully, like the technique within that is by definition successful. It can be more or less efficient for sure, but there's not going to be this sort of dramatic shift in efficiency. It's going to be the ability to produce force, which is what we
Mhm.
consider strength to be. And it's a more complicated question. We got a question from C here too. It's nice we get some questions in the chat. C says, "I'm going as deep as I can, but I still get cued to go deeper. I'm wondering if this is ankle or hip limiting." Because my heels come off the ground even in lifting shoes. Same thing we said to John. Send in a video first. But Chase, what do you think?
Making sure that your balance is over the middle of the foot. Are
Mm-hmm.
you bending your hips and knees at the same time? Are you leaning over enough? There's kind of some variables that we need to assess from the video, but just make sure again that you're pointing your nipples down, you're shoving your ass as far back as you can. And a simple fix may just be, hey, put some of the weight in your heels to where your toes aren't being so mashed down into the floor and you're on the balls of your feet.
Yeah, think about it like you've addressed what the problem is conceptually. So the problem that you just said is that your heels are coming off the ground, right? Put your heels back on the ground. That's now
Hmm.
the prompt that you have to solve. That's the problem that you're trying to work through. Now think about that. When you're squatting, you can say, "Keep my heels on the ground. Keep my heels on the ground." You'll likely shift backwards, right? Think about sending your butt back behind you, leaning down, right? Sitting right in between your heels. Because if you're falling forward the whole time, you need to counter that motion backwards.
Hmm.
Okay, but yeah, definitely send in a video. See, we'll check out some videos after this guy too. And then there's the last one, was that Ripito hasn't been contributing to Olympic weightlifting. How do you feel about this one, Chase?
This is the same thing with like kind of what we're seeing in the media today is that you're not a doctor, so you can't prescribe X to fix this side effect, right? It's it's kind of a hard kind of thing to kind of grasp, but if you take a step back and you actually apply critical thinking and understanding the principles, the first principles that what we talk as in starting strength with making sure that we have a grasp of the physics of what we're dealing with, the biomechanics, the anatomy, all that stuff, and then apply it to a lifter. It doesn't matter if the lifter is your mom or dad or Lasha, it's going to benefit them, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand that, and they just look at Rip and they just kind of, again, Rip is Rip, and he gets in his own little ruts, and he has his way of talking to where people just take it not for what it seems.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like whenever people are attempting to criticize something, they kind of come at it with like the most bad faith possible, and they're like,
Hmm.
"Man, I have all this extra ammunition I can use now," without understanding there's like a level of pragmatism to the statements.
Hmm.
John Gloria had another sentence here. This was pretty informative. He said, "Once it gets past the first 6 inches, while it's hard, it gets much easier at the top, or it just fails at the bottom." I translated that sense a little bit so it made more sense to the rest of the listeners. That makes me think it's bar path, John, right? So
Hmm.
when you're benching, you can't touch the bar down straight at your shoulder. If you touch the bar straight down at your shoulder, the range of motion is really long and it tends to chew people's shoulders up. So we touch lower on the chest, kind of about the mid sternum around the nipple line. You now have this horizontal distance between where your sternum is, where you touch the bar down to, and then your shoulder. The bar has to get back over that point, right? Or else you're kind of doing a front raise.
Alex, I don't think you can see that because the question's blocking your chest there.
Oh, nice. That's a very good point, Chase. Ah, man. That's why they pay you the big bucks.
Totally.
Here we go. Okay, yeah, John. So what I was saying is that we can't really bench pressing up to our shoulder, because it's for the reasons I was saying before. So we have to touch a little bit lower. Benching patterns tend to look like this, right? So now that I'm here, I need to cover that distance between where I've touched the bar and then my shoulder, which means I need to press it back up. If you are pressing it straight off your chest like this, you basically end up just doing a heavy front raise, right? This kind of looks like a front raise. So if you are having a really hard time getting it out of the bottom, it generally indicates that you're pressing it too low, like you're touching it too low in the first place, or it's coming off your chest low and you're keeping it there. So priority for you, I would say, aim your fingers, your elbows, and everything backwards. So you're pressing it back over your shoulder. Chase, do you have any other ideas that come up after this?
Just bar and grip placement. Again, where you're touching, how you're gripping the bar. I don't know. A lot of it's just kind of skepticism. Like we need to see a video, right?
Yeah. One of the best responses is we can't see your bench from here, which is very valid. Yeah, so like the participation thing that Chase was talking about, it's like gravity applies the same to me as much as it does to the 80-year-old Aunt Meredith, just as much as it does to Lou. So like the physics of the system are more or less the same. So like one thing that Rip said in that sentence that everybody's making fun of was that according to our analysis, like something along those lines, like the technique was subpar according to our analysis of saying like, hey, the bar didn't really come off the ground at the midfoot. The bar had a lot of forward and backwards deviation, things like that. All of those are what we consider to be mechanical efficiencies, and it doesn't really matter who's doing them. Like you can set world records in being slightly inefficient. Like it's there's nothing really wrong with that, I don't think. But yeah, so we'll get to the next point, are the most common criticisms. These are the technique doesn't matter people. So I think we have some good examples of technique mattering, right? So we have John Gloria, for example, saying the bench is really hard the first 6 inches off his chest, right? And then we have C saying, I'm having a really hard time squatting because my ankles or my heels are coming off the ground. It's very in vogue nowadays to say the technique really doesn't matter on the internet. And then for that, I think my response is interact with more people, and you will very rapidly see that technique matters quite significantly to them. It may not matter to you when you're looking at a bunch of people, but if you were to ask each individual person, does their technique matter to them, they will almost certainly say yes.
And we were talking about this earlier, me and Alex. I kind of use the example of like the technique is kind of the corral point, right? So with technique being sound, it's also going to prevent you from being injured, and it kind of gives you a basis of what the model should look like. So in the squat, for example, our technique is to shove out the knees, making sure that their thighs are in line with their feet, and that's also going to help prevent any torsion on the knee. And also it allows us to hit depth. So that way we're not posting 6 inches high squats and calling them full depth, beautiful looking squats.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where like in addition to the technique doesn't matter crowd, they'll generally say like injury technique is more or less unrelated to injury. It's load management only, which is it's an understandable premise, but has holes in it, at least as far as I'm concerned. The models that Chase and I are talking about that Starting Strength has gone through a lot of backflips to define is that they provide definitions, and those definitions provide consistency, like Chase was saying with the corralling points. Depending on how you define those things, those definitions can provide consistency as a means of load distribution, right? So actually, I just got an email. He may be listening to this now. Rodrigo, shout out to you. But I just got an email from a gentleman in Uruguay saying he was having like hyperchronic knee pain in one of his knees. I looked at his squat. He thought it was kind of this big orthopedic thing. And then to me, we'll see how it goes. He's doing a very high bar squat with a very knee loaded movement and position, right? So when we're talking about load management, that gentleman has decided with his form to load the ever living shit out of his knees, right? That in itself is a means of load management, and you could probably tell him to take the weight down and do all this other stuff. Yes, of course, but you could also just have him do a little bit more of a neutral squat. You can have him do a more hip-loaded squat rather than knee-loaded squat. So for that gentleman, like you can have comfort as provided through distributing that load. right? So like if we're talking about injury as a means of load management, technique is also heavily involved in how you manage that load.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of people also say that beginners will self-organize. Like if you go to the gym and then you just tell a random person, it's like, hey, I want you to squat. If you go to the gym for 10 days, squat every single time you go to the gym. They'll probably do something pretty similar every time, and they'll never just slam dunk it on the first try and do a perfect textbook squat. Chase, what are your thoughts? You see a lot of beginners. So how do beginners tend to self-organize their technique?
Yeah, it's more so like if one problem is sticking out, let's say like they can't balance themselves, they'll just try to hammer the balance aspect of it, making sure they don't fall, and or the bar placement. They're more localized on one thing, and they try to fix that. Um, Now, that's kind of not the case with someone who's genetically gifted, but they again, if they don't have a specific kind of slap on the head and realize, hey, look, you don't need to worry about this thing, right? And you need to worry about a few different points. It helps kind of focus and organize them in that sense. But the whole entire aspect of like just someone getting underneath the bar and them understanding how to balance themselves or how to hold the bar properly on that stuff, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like you will very rarely meet people who are accidentally good at things. Just kind of by definition. There may be those people out there that may have just not tried the activity, but it's like it's pretty rare to get Michael Jordan and basketball combined. It just doesn't happen very many times, which is why we remember it. But yeah, so like beginners, they do self organize, but generally not very well. If you ask a lot of people if they've attempted to exercise at some point in their life, they will say that they have, and then they also have stopped, right? And you can ask them why, and they'll say it's uncomfortable. They weren't seeing results. It wasn't super pleasant. A lot of those basically generic responses, some form of the three. There are very high level rate of attrition or high levels and rates of attrition because of the fact that the process is uncomfortable. If you're doing like if you're doing high bar squats with the bar, super high up wedged into your neck, and you're doing a quarter squat and it's making your knees hurt, right? Because you just can't figure the damn movement out. Do you think your chances of staying in the gym and continuing to train your legs is really high? I don't think that chance is very high. The people who attempt to deadlift or do some sort of deadlifting pattern and they tweak their back every time because it's in a different position every time they try to deadlift, technique matters to them, right?
Hmm.
So like beginners definitely self-organize, but I just think like not really that well. Um, it's you have a lot of beginners. Almost all of them are very aimless in the gym, and they're relatively inefficient. So
Hmm.
giving them kind of a technique to latch onto, one that is mechanically efficient, that's a huge win for everybody involved. Um, Chase, do you want to do the best of Reddit and then or do you want to do the rampant or the SS specific ones? What do you think?
You probably have more time on Reddit. I'll probably just handle the SS ones.
Okay, we'll do the SS ones and we'll do some videos at the end. This is the fun one, I think. This is the starting strength, rampant obesity. But first, we have this one.
Yep.
Pete, yeah, Hyeh. That's a cool name. What is the rebuttal for somebody that says starting strength injures people? Use RPE-based programming to avoid injury and continue to progress. Assume that this particularly individual is a disciple of Mike Tuchscherer. I love Mike Tuchscherer. He's great. His programming information is absolutely wonderful. I agree with him on virtually all things, and I think he would also agree with a lot of starting strength content as well. So RPE-based programming and auto regulation based approaches into intermediate and advanced, they're almost necessary after a certain point of advancement. That's fairly common knowledge. I wouldn't say that starting strength injures people, right? I would say that poor load management and then poor technique choices injure people, and that's a voluntary decision that they're making. So, like, starting strength is a novice program that works until it doesn't work. What you're saying is when someone injures themselves, is they've gone past the point of it not working, and then they're saying, "How could this thing have done this to me?" Like you don't get to go and use your scissors to cut your grass outside and say, "Wow, these are the worst scissors in the world." That's really stupid.
Hmm.
What do you think, Chase?
Yeah, they're using load management to try to fix a movement pattern error, right? I think that's the easiest fix because, again, we pride ourselves at starting strength of being the most technically sound coaches out there, and we know how to coach, right? But programming is kind of an easy fix where it's like, hey, look, my knees hurt from squatting. Well, okay, well, let's do some leg presses instead, or let's do some hamstring curls instead. That is not the way to avoid it. It's to make sure that the movement is sound. And again, due to maybe the movement has changed and we need to go back down, the load management has then affected that.
Yeah,
But it's
Pete.
more so making sure that we are looking at the movement and that we're not fucking that up.
Yeah, so I think that one of the nuances of what Chase is saying is that like technique does change with load. Your 1 rep max looks very different than like an 8 rep max, things like that. As things get heavy, that technique tends to deviate and slow down, and those are technique deviations, which we'd say, let's say, redistribute that load, which could theoretically cause injury. So like if you're deadlift with a pretty straight back, and then all of a sudden you put another 20 kilos on the bar, and you have to round your back to fuck all to get it up there, you're not very practiced with that backgrounding, that could be relatively injurious because you're not practiced with that level of backgrounding.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty simple conceptually. I wouldn't say that starting strength injures people. That's a pretty like inflammatory thing to say, because it's a program that is meant to be left whenever it stops working, right? So it's not forever strength; it's starting strength. And if you were to say like, I think that question may have some more nuance. So definitely email us or send an email to the support email so we can get some more nuance in that. Just put it in the chat. But all right, we'll go through all of the really funny ones that I really like. The first one, Chase.
Yeah, here's like the big bombshell. Rip is both fat and old, right? So you got this guy screaming in the video saying like, look, you need to gain weight, you need to do this, this, and this, right? But you look at the guy and you're like, why the fuck would I be listening to him, right? People obsess over the superficial aspects of what they're looking at. And this is for anything, right? Like if I have a doctor who's yelling at me about I need to lose weight, but yet he's over there huffing and puffing and he's a fat ass, I'm not going to really listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, you have to take a step back and realize and critical think about, okay, what is this guy actually saying? And is it bullshit or not? And a lot of people just can't get over that hump, right? I mean, Rip this is his personality. Like his voice is very hypnotic, right? And you can just kind of just
Hypnotic.
just fall
Uh,
into like this weird, like just slumber and just look at the man. And you're just like, man, I don't know what the fuck this guy is saying. He does kind of talk slow, right? But that's just the way he is. And you just you're so focused on his looks, but not what he's saying.
yeah,
Um,
it's really funny. It's just like
yeah,
people who make fun of him for being an old fat guy. The old part,
you
what
can't
can you
fucking
do?
fit. Yeah, you can't fucking
Yeah,
fix that.
he cannot Benjamin Button his way out of that situation.
No.
The fat part, listen, man, the dude's been in like 85 million motorcycle and horse accidents. I don't know which ones are worse, and
Hmm.
he is an old guy. Like,
Yeah.
listen, you should be happy if you are as capable as he is when you're that age. But yeah,
Well,
those ones always crack me up. People saying like, "Why would I listen to this guy? He's fat as
yeah.
shit." This is like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, and I've never met a shredded old dude. I've never have.
I
It's
have
either
never met a shredded old guy.
they're either super sickly looking or they're just fucking fat.
Yeah,
And Rip's not even that fat. He's just a little pudgy. It's just what you do whenever you get old.
it would be like if your grandpa was giving you like girlfriend advice, and you'd be like, "I've seen grandma. She's not a 10 out of 10.
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
gonna listen. Grandma, she is old and wrinkly. I'm not gonna take any advice from you."
Yeah,
Yeah, so go mad for all, even you. I think Starting Strength makes a bunch of jokes about this one now, but I
it
still
is.
hear it all of the absolute ever loving time. Is that should I do go mad is like a super frequent question that we're asked. Whereas in the books, in both of the books, it's like very specifically prescribed, just to say if you are an underweight teenager who doesn't want to make your parents spend an extra $60 in food a week, get a gallon of milk. It's relatively cheap. It's relatively anabolic. It's a bunch of calories. There you go.
Yep.
But for some reason, that message gets lost tremendously. What do you think about Go Mad and then the 200 pounds or else one, Chase?
For the 200-pound one, it's yeah. I have to. I'm 5'4". Right now, I currently weigh 145. Do I really need to be 200 pounds? No, right? But you need to be bigger because we want more muscle mass on you, right? This is kind of just an all eclipsing statement. You don't have to be 200 pounds determining your height, right? You can be more than 200 pounds. You can be less than it. But as long as that you have a nice big frame on you, where you're kind of hamstringing yourself to where you want to be 178. No, dude. Like I have a guy who came in and he's like 6'3". He wants to be 195. It's like you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to be that sickly. Right now he's 270 and he wants to drop down that much. I'm like, no. You need to be about 305, but with muscle. There's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the butt statement that people
Yeah,
always
don't even worry
don't
about
listen
the
to.
number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always a really funny one. I think Rip makes fun. Rip says the 200 pounds one just to make fun of skinny nerds,
Yeah.
just to be like, "You're not even 200 pounds. You're a little baby man."
Hmm.
I laugh every time I hear it. Personally, Pete has a good question. We'll answer Pete's question a little bit after we do this next one because it's kind of relevant to your question, Pete. This one always cracks me up. People saying that all starting strength coaches are fat. It's not all of them. It is most of them. That is a very important thing. It's most of them, not all of them. Chase, how fat are you?
So I took a DEXA a few months ago, and I was so at the time 242, 240.
Okay.
I was 198 in lean mass, and my fat was like 30 something. I forgot, but my visceral fat was like point
What was the
two.
percent? Just give us the percent, not the absolute figures.
Oh man, it was. I think my BMI, of course, is wrong, but I think I forgot. I think it was like 18, 15, somewhere around there.
All right, Chase is going to have a brain aneurysm while he tries to remember how
Yeah, I
fat he
don't
is.
know, but it was in the teens for
It
my.
was exactly. It was in the teens. These pictures are of me, of yours truly, Alex. These are when I was relatively like the strongest I had really ever been in my life. I am 5'10". If I am lying, I will say 5'11". But earnestly, I'm 5'10". Not even close to 6 foot tall. Chase is 6'2", by the way, for those reference numbers, by the way. In these
Six
pictures, I
one,
weighed.
not 6'1", man. I'm not
No,
6'2".
Chase is 6'3", guys. Okay, everyone. But yeah, for reference, in these pictures, I weighed around like 174, 176 pounds, depending on how much water was fluctuating. These were taken around like 6-ish months apart. You can maintain this level of leanness pretty easily. And then my pull at around this time was in the low fives. It fluctuated between like 500 and 530 or so. My squat was in the mid fours. Squats fluctuated between like 440 to 465 ish. My bench. I think around this time in my life, it was somewhere between 240 to 280. I never really benched too much. You can probably see that with my pecs. And then press was in the low twos as well. So, like, not all of the starting strength coaches are morbidly obese. Most of them are. I will say that for damn sure. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like, if you can integrate the habits of being lean into your life, it just kind of happens. It's not something you
Yeah.
need to be super finicky about. If I wanted to push my pull into the 600s and I wanted to push my bench into the 300s, the first thing I would do is start to gain weight. You know, the reason I was this lean is so I can compete in sports that had a weight class in them. And then this ties in with Pete's question here. It's too long, so I will just read the first of this part. He said, a few of my lifters are noticing they are breathing more heavily during everyday lifting. For example, going up a flight of stairs. They aren't playing sports or participating in physical activity other than training. And then the rest of it says the starting strength method. They aren't doing any structured conditioning. Each of them has gained around 20 pounds of body weight, but they're also considerably stronger. They are concerned about their cardio and life at a heavier weight. What is a good rebuttal? They are all late novice or intermediate. Do you see any problems trying to retain clients at late novice / intermediate level? Any advice? Chase, what do you think?
That term, advanced novice or intermediate, tells you exactly what's happening. So they have developed a physiological adaptation to where they are very good at force production, right? They are not going to be really great at aerobic anything, right? And I have had a few people deal with this. If those guys are kind of really slacking off with their diet, which a lot of people do, right? You only have maybe like an hour, 90 minutes with some people. And then, they'll tell you over the weekend they just fucked around and they ate everything because they were so tired and just needed to recover from the workout. That's a whole entire different issue. But I tell people don't worry about it, right? So you experience how great strong is, right? So let's not cut any of that out. And that's what we'll have to do if you want to start dieting or losing weight. So just keep doing everything that you're doing, and maybe we'll adjust the macros and stuff like that. There's kind of smarter ways of getting into it instead of just doing this huge programming change and diet.
Yeah, yeah. Chase is right. Don't do any huge changes. There's no reason to do huge changes ever. But like Pete, I think the big question here is what do they want? Like you are as coaches, we are just like intellectual entities that exist to facilitate that person's wants. That's it.
Hmm.
We are not there to tell them what they want. If they ask, you can answer that. But for the most part, they're paying you for a specific service, and that service is what they want. It's not what you want. So if they don't want to live like that, you should not be advising them to do that. Straight up and down. Like if someone's being hyper unreasonable and they're like, I want to pull 800 pounds while weighing 150 pounds, you can tell them that's just not going to happen. Sucks to suck. But in this situation, you can do a lot of fun things with programming. You can take the light squat day. If they have a middle light squat day, turn that into like a conditioning session. You can say, hey, I need 5 sets of pause squats done at a really light load, do sets of 12, and I need them done in 10 minutes. There's your little conditioning block, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can put the prowler at the end of workout 3. You can add in a workout 4 where they come in, do their accessory work, do a little GPP block, do some conditioning work. That conditioning work will help them in the future. Like it's not useless. Like being in good condition allows you to do more work, and that more work will allow you to get stronger, right? Because if you're like super out of breath after your first set of 5, right, and it wasn't a limit set, your next few sets are going to seem a lot mentally more rigorous. But if you're in really decent shape and it didn't seem like that big of a deal, congratulations, you could probably do 6 more sets if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't really have any problems retaining clients, because if they're having a problem with it, that means they don't want that to happen, and then your job as the coach is to make that not happen anymore. If they told you like, hey, I want to join a powerlifting meet in 6 months, no matter what I say, make me as strong as humanly possible, then remind them of that. But otherwise, no. Another Pete question here for Chase.
Do you program any conditioning at your OKC gym, Chase? Yeah. Again, this kind of goes back into what we were saying is this, what goals do the clients want, right? We've done the program. We've got everybody generally strong, right? Now it's time to apply that strength to whatever they want. I've had a few people, like we have a prowler in there and then an echo bike. I've had a few people push the prowler. Haven't had anybody really do the echo bike yet, because once they've done it once, they're like, oh, fuck this. It's terrible. But the prowler is usually what I use. That's my go-to conditioning. Or like what Alex was saying is just manipulate the rest times and sets. Um, the demographic that I usually work with, they're okay with just getting generally stronger and even more stronger, to the point that they don't really even worry about conditioning. Because again, I remind them of that fact of, look, if we start conditioning, your squat's going to take a little bit of a hit and your deadlift is too. So just don't worry about it, and they're usually fine.
Yeah, figure out what their priorities are, Pete, and then like go from there, like Chase was saying. Edvin Vito, it's a lot of E's, man. He said, "What do you think about kettlebells for conditioning?" I think they have a much higher fatigue cost than most people assume. They really do. Like if your lifter is doing a lot of deadlifts in the week, and they're doing, let's say, 7 or 8 sets of deadlifts across the week. Let's say if they're doing reasonable reps, so sets of 4 to 10, they're doing really not that many, maybe like 60 on the low end deadlift reps. If you have them do like 3 rounds of kettlebell swings, they've now added like 80 to 150 now hip hinges into their programming, right? So it's like, even though they're at a low load, that's still a pattern that they're using elsewhere, right? So it's going to already be fatigued, and you're now adding a tremendous amount of volume, even if it's at a lighter weight. So like the fatigue costs of kettlebells, higher than people think by a good bit. You can get a good workout with them, and like workout, I mean like feeling tired and sweaty, but it's really hard to program around. I don't really like them very much. I think things like the prowler, like not very eccentrically loaded, things
Yep.
like the echo bike are absolutely wonderful because it's really hard to fuck yourself up on them. Whereas the kettlebell, like the hard part about the kettlebell really isn't throwing it up. It's basically like the dynamic lengthening that happens as like that weight is rocketing back down to you, and you have to catch it, and then everything on your backside is dynamically lengthening or eccentrically lengthening as you're controlling that load.
Yeah,
Chase, you ever?
a
Yeah,
shit ton of eccentric stress.
absolutely. Yeah, like super high cost for conditioning
Yep.
for work. Like what you're trying to do with conditioning work. It's like we know there's a dose response relationship to it. If you run 100 miles a week, you're really good at running. It's awesome. If you run
Mhm.
1 mile a week, you're bad at running. We get it. So you want to facilitate stuff that is like really low fatigue, and you can do a lot of it. That's things like the prowler. That's things like the echo bike. Chase, any more thoughts for Mr. Edvin?
Um, no, and again, kind of look at the tool that you're using with a kettlebell conditioning, right? You have to use a bunch of kettlebells. Usually, that's okay with some people, but a prowler is just one thing. A bike is
Yeah.
one thing. So kind of just think about that in a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's just one thing. I think like this kind of goes back to Pete's thing as well. Like things that you can do is just like, hey, before every meal, I just want you to take a little 10-minute walk. Even things like that, a brisk 10-minute walk
Yep.
does wonders. Like hey, when you wake up in the morning, wake up a little bit early, go get some sun in your eyes, go take a 20-minute walk, stuff like that. It's all super helpful. It's just like, hey, I want you to go, instead of playing with your kids at the house, go and take your kids to a park, and
Yep.
go, run around with your kids. Instead of just walking your dog in the morning, go on a little light jog with your dog. It's like you're trying to find little tiny places to slip conditioning work in.
Hmm.
Because it is a problem. Is once people get bigger, is that they have to lose like a long time with those adaptive processes. Um, Chase, let's get back to it. Is there anything else that you want to cover in the fun posting episode of saying, here's all the stupid stuff we want to talk about?
I guess kind of more so like just this goes for really anything. If you're gonna shit post about some stuff or just think that what the guy on the video is talking about is bullshit, actually listen to him. Look at the first principles that he's talking about, if there's any first principles, right? So that's kind of like your should be your red alarm right there. And if it's not tied back to actually critical thinking, to actually provable science, then what you're dealing with is just a fucking trash can that is on fire.
Yeah, if it's entirely not founded in anything and the person has clearly not done, I don't want to say like research, it's a little bit of a tainted word, but like they haven't really done anything past a cursory analysis, right?
Hmm.
It's probably not great.
Yep.
The thing that I'll notice about a lot of these criticisms is that their criticism may be totally correct at the most surface level analysis that you can get away with. If you investigate even slightly further, you start to find things to pick that apart with. Um, uh, with argument and with all of this stuff, it's kind of two people who are unsure of the truth. If both of them think they're 100% right, you're never going to get anywhere. And then the point of an argument or a debate, like a healthy debate, is for both of you to learn more together.
Mhm.
Like if you watch these Zach Tillender videos, it is 100% not that. If you watch all these other fucking stupid videos poo-pooing starting strength, it is 100% not that. It's saying starting strength name, we're going to get clicks by using it, stuff like that.
Yep.
Um, and then John
But
Gloria, good question for the road. How about barbell complexes for conditioning? Chase, do you want to go first?
um, again, it's just you gotta have to really think about the loading, what you're gonna have to use, and the reps and sets. More so for barbell complexes, you're gonna have to adjust the amount of rest, um, not necessarily the movements, right? So like if I was doing something like I do like maybe some 12 doubles on a squat and just time it minute on a minute or minute after a minute like an EMOM, and making sure that the load is really light. But generally a bunch of movement that has a bunch of eccentric, it's just going to fuck up your lifter. So making sure that they're already used to that movement, right? For a squat, everyone's used to the eccentric loading. Now we're just making it a little bit lighter, and we're not doing a shit ton of them. We're just doing more back to back in a sense. I think that'll be fine.
Yeah, I really like just compressing the time, like Chase was saying, and you can also add in superset stuff as well. So it's like
Mhm.
if I have someone who needs like to do 5 sets of RDLs, and I know that like they still kind of need 4 minutes of rest in between those, but I don't want them just sitting on their ass. It's like, hey, you could probably do some biceps or some shoulders. You can do chin ups or something. Like yeah, there's stuff to do. You can figure out something to do in that period of time. I don't care if it's super effective. I just want you to keep moving. Like barbell complexes, they can be a little bit awkward. I think traditionally they're done with like the same barbell. So it's like you
Mhm.
clean the barbell up. You do 5 front squats. Once you do 5 front squats, you do 5 push presses, and then you take it down. You do 5 rows, something like that. They tend to be bottlenecked by the smallest movement. So, like in that situation, the press would be the hardest thing to do. So like the front squats aren't really going to be that hard. The rows aren't going to be that hard, but the press would be that hard. And then that can impact programming elsewhere. So it's like the reason we have different loads for different exercises is because they are incredibly different. So like a challenging load for like overhead press conditioning is totally different than a challenging load for front squat conditioning. So like a single barbell complex is kind of really, it's really picky.
Mhm.
Um, and then Nicholas Webb says, "What's a good resource to learn about nutrition for strength gain?" Just go to the nutrition website or the nutrition section of Starting Strength. There's a ton of good articles on there. Robert Santana did a good breakdown for like protein, fat, carbohydrates, calorie demands for barbell training, things like that.
Yeah, and I think Marcus talked to Mike Israel from RP Strength,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
so all that's good. He knows a lot about it. And who else? There was someone else that was
Yeah,
on.
I really like Renaissance Periodization. They have a lot of good, really good nutrition stuff, and same thing with Lane Norton. Lane Norton has a lot of good
Mhm.
nutrition stuff. They both have like relatively convenient macro coaching and calorie apps that are like super cheap. I would say definitely check those two out. If you're just looking for like the scientific underpinnings to like understand what's going on with the systems, the Robert Santana articles are really good, but like quite lengthy. So, okay, Chase, anything else before we sign off? We're about to hit the hour mark.
Um, no, I don't think so. Just don't be one of those angry ass fucking trolls on the internet. Just make sure that you're actually thinking about what's going on in front of you, I guess.
Yeah, I think I should get Mick to change the title on this one to be like, "Don't be a weenie," because that's
Mhm.
really it. All these people are just being weenies. But that's it, guys. Starting strength coaches Alex Kosari and Chase Lindley, the cooler one. We're signing off. We typically do these guys on Sunday, Sunday evening, Sunday night, wherever you are. So be sure to pop in next time, and then we will switch the cameras here, and then I'll put this guy up. Look at it, cherish and relish it. It's beautiful. All
So is
right,
that
bye, guys.
pin? Is that charcoal pin?
It's ink. It's some
Ink.
sort of ink. So the Instagram for this girl, by the way, is Ink by Olivia. She's like, yeah, tiny artist, but I love it. All right, see you guys later.